Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Sunday Matinee. We are on episode 19. I'm your host, Ben Stahl, and joining me today is my sister, Catherine Stahl. Catherine, welcome back.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
And we may have Gary Chambers joining us today. He may be running late. We're not sure. But this isn't a professional thing, so life happens, and, I have no control over that. So all's good. So, let's kick things off with some news. So, literally, the day after we recorded yesterday, I made a huge deal about the Kong versus Godzilla trailer. And then, literally, the next day, Disney dropped the Raya and the Last Dragon trailer. So, it's cool to see some footage of that. It is definitely one of Disney Animation's most beautiful films. It's dropping March 5th in theaters where available, and of course, with premiere access on Disney Plus. So that extra $30 will get you access to that. I'm sure it'll go free at some point, the same way Mulan did. Unlike Mulan, I am actually considering dropping the 30 for this one because it looks cool. And Disney Animation Studios they've been on a hot streak for 10 plus years now with films like Tangled, Frozen, Wreck-It Ralph, Moana, Zootopia. Like they really haven't missed a lot of beats. So I'm really excited for that. I'd ask Catherine if she's going to be dropping the $30, but since she's linked to my Disney Plus account, if I pay for it, she gets it. So yeah, you may get to watch that too, Catherine.
Little
Um,
super benefits.
so in other news, so a few years ago we had a reboot of the Tomb Raider franchise on film, starring Alicia Vikander, and it kind of flopped at theaters. But they're still going ahead with a sequel, and the Lovecraft Country's Misha Green has been tapped to write and direct. This would actually make the first time that a woman has been attached to direct. I don't know about writing, but definitely the first time one's been attached to direct one of these films. The first two with Angelina Jolie were both directed by men. Um, so this would be a huge thing. Considering that Tomb Raider is a film with a strong female protagonist. So that is something to look forward to finally get a woman's perspective on this franchise.
Yes.
Um, I actually haven't seen any of the Tomb Raider movies. I've played the first game of the reboot trilogy, and it was excellent. So I'm hoping that this movie fares well because Tomb Raider is one of the very few video game franchises that does feature a strong female protagonist and has been successful for years. So yeah, here's hoping. Plus, we need more good video game movies. There aren't enough.
Yeah.
Moving on, season 3 of The Mandalorian is set to begin production in April. I'm predicting that means it may not launch by year's end the way that seasons 1 and 2 did, because that gives them about 6 months really to get it all put together, and that's not a lot of time for a big budget television series like that. But you never know. It's Disney; they do love to work their magic. So in more video game movie news, so Kevin Hart has joined the cast of the Borderlands film alongside Kate Blanchett. What an interesting duo to
Yeah.
lead this film. Which the first, I don't know what they're going to be basing it on because the first game doesn't necessarily have the world's best story. It's more interested in the whole gameplay loop of shoot things, get better guns, shoot bigger things, etc. And the Kevin Hart is joining the cast as Roland, who, as I recall from the first game, is a pretty stoic character, and Kevin Hart is not a stoic human being. We enjoy Kevin Hart for the ridiculous comedic chops that he brings to the table. So yeah, it's going to be a very interesting film, and also just the fact that Kate Blanchett is in it at all
That's pretty.
um, is crazy. It could be that she enjoyed doing Thor so much and getting an action movie under her belt that she decided to branch out even more. So yeah, that'll be fun when that happens. Hopefully, again, more good video game movies. Please be good. Um, so again, I'm talking about Godzilla versus Kong last week. Um, it ended up getting delayed by 5 days. I scoured the internet, couldn't really find a reason why. Um, but I mean, it's only 5 days. So that may change the way we schedule things in March with all those Godzilla episodes, but probably not. Um, Netflix and Legendary Pictures are, speaking of Tomb Raider, they're developing a Tomb Raider anime series and a Skull Island anime series, speaking of Kong. So that should be fun. Really, no other details on that. This is a bit of good news for Black Panther fans out there. Michael B. Jordan has stated that he is open to returning to the role of Eric Killmonger. I don't know how they would bring him back. We are, of course, entering a phase of the MCU where we're getting into the multiverse. So it's very possible that he could be ripped in from another dimension. But these are also comic book movies. You can bring a character back with, any kind of crazy explanation. So, yeah, but Catherine, would you be excited to see Michael B. Jordan return
Yes.
to Black Panther?
Yes, I would. Yeah, I really, really would. I think he did a really solid job. I think there was a great character arc for him. I would be interested to see one, like depending upon how they bring him back into it, like what role does he take in the multiverse? And also, I think that they opened themselves up with Sterling K. Brown being the dad. Like, what if there was some more dimensions to discover there if it is actually going into the multiverse? So I think they have some pretty awesome names and could create really cool stories.
Yeah, there has been a theory that he could come back, and if it is a multiverse, he could come back and he could be Black Panther.
Yeah, I could totally see that.
If he comes from another universe where his father didn't necessarily betray Wakanda or be killed,
Killed for
yeah, he could have been the prince. So yeah, it's an interesting concept. And again, yeah, great actor and great character arc, like you said. So having him come back would actually, it would be great. If as long as they do it right. But
Yeah.
we've been saying for a long time, if Marvel does it right, and they always seem to get it right. So
Getting pretty solid.
you know. And finally, in the news, this dropped after I'd sent out the itinerary to everybody. So apparently, a sequel to Cloverfield is in development, and my first thought is, wait, there are already two sequels, so how does that work?
Yeah.
But those two sequels were developed originally as just as their own projects, and then were retooled to be part of the Cloverfield universe. So I'm thinking this time around they're actually planning a real sequel to the first film, because those two sequels are both kind of prequels or stories that sort of play alongside the action of the first film. And those are, of course, 10 Cloverfield Lane, which is very good,
Mhm.
and the Cloverfield Paradox, which premiered on Netflix 3 years ago and is not good.
Oh.
So here's hoping that they can recreate the magic of the first film, which is one of the best giant monster films of this century. All right, so let's get into what we're all here to talk about. So today is January 31st. February is close upon us, which means we are 2 days away from the Groundhog Day holiday. So this week's episode, we're going to look at the 1993 Bill Murray comedy Groundhog Day. Rise and shine, yeah.
Woo!
So,
Such a good one.
if you have not seen Groundhog Day, it is about a misanthropic weatherman who is caught in a time loop, repeating the same day over and over again. And that day, of course, happens to be Groundhog Day. I really don't think I need to say much more because we're going to be talking a lot about this film anyways. He basically has to repeat this day and finally realize that there are lessons to be learned about life and how to become a better person. So I thought about this when I watched it recently. What is the significance of the actual Groundhog's Day holiday to the story? Why did they pick that day? It's an interesting holiday because it's really not a huge deal as a
Yeah.
holiday. Basically, they the groundhog comes out of his little hole or cage or whatever
Hmm.
and stares at his shadow. And supposedly, if the groundhog sees his shadow, then we're in for 6 more weeks of winter. But if he doesn't see his shadow, we're in for an early spring, or vice versa. I think I got it right.
I
Um,
think you did.
I mean, obviously that's a ton of malarkey right there. Obviously that's not real because we don't know how to talk to groundhogs. We don't know how they can talk
What?
to us. So but it's a fun holiday. It's cute. Um, but it is a holiday that centers entirely on the possibility that change is coming. Either we're stuck with more winter, which most years is something we don't want.
No, please no.
Um, we are currently in the winter season here in the northern hemisphere up here in Washington State, and it's typically gray here for most of the year, anyways. We're ready for longer days. We're ready for more sunshine.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, it's a holiday that centers entirely on that possibility that good change may be coming in a movie where a man gets stuck in a time loop where nothing changes except what he can respond to.
Yeah,
His
those
response is
are,
the only thing that he can change.
yeah.
So
I
so yeah.
suppose.
Do you think that this could have worked on? I mean, it obviously could have, but would you pick any other holiday for this to take place on?
I mean, I think that if you did, it would change the movie a lot. I think that you bring up some really great points that this is a holiday all about change, right? And we've commercialized so many other holidays to be about other bigger, broader, ridiculous things that this one just lent itself to be able to focus on the story, but also focus on the ridiculousness of the town, right? I mean, he specifically goes to see the groundhog give the weather report, and so it also allows you to just go and see humans being humans, seeing humans care about things that aren't important, and having to learn those lessons of change through that, through something that is less commercialized than any other holiday, that also does not have any sort of religious affiliations to the holiday, I think is a really great entry point for them to tackle that.
That's a good point too. And yeah, he travels to Punxsutawney, this sort of offbeat kind of town to see the groundhog because I don't know if that's how it is in like the real world, but in the story of the film, Punxsutawney is like the original sort of Groundhog Day town. Um, and it's a very offbeat kind of town.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the big city. It's and it's for someone like his character Phil Connors who wants to sort of make it big in the world and be famous and popular and get to a bigger network and cover the weather for on the national level. It's like, oh, why am I here?
Right.
It's
And
a
I
huge
mean, and you look at it in between him and the character Rita, who's the supervisor of the station. I don't remember exactly.
producer.
Producer. Right. So she wants to get into that small life, small town charm and look at the everyday human and look at the experience. And he again kind of symbolizes more of that. I need the thrill. This isn't news. Like, what can we do to make this a bigger deal than it is? When really it's a big thing for this town, and being able to see what different communities celebrate, I think, is a nice entry point into that too.
So comedy, a lot of comedy comes from repetition. So in a film in which we're stuck in a time loop and reliving a lot of the same beats over and over again, how does that repetition play with our emotions in the story? And it's not just comedy in this case. There are instances where Phil relives moments that are stressful, um, and at one point even incredibly tragic.
Yeah.
Um, so how would you say that the loop engages our emotions with the repetition? Hello,
Oh,
kitty
there's
cat.
there's a cat who's about to make her presence known. Um, yeah, okay, thank you. I think that, well, gosh. I think the repetition does a really beautiful job because you go into the mundane of seeing the exact same thing over and over and over again, but they also allow there to be really beautiful moments of exploration. And so you start to see that the repetition can go a little bit off of its track. But I think it's really great to see the comedy. I think it's really fun to get to, as an actor and a theater practitioner, it's really awesome to get to see an actor have to explore that and try and make it new every day for the people that they are with, who are experiencing it for the first time, and they have to be in that moment to pretend. But there are, like you say, there's some really dark moments in that too, which I think is something that honestly draws me even more into the movie, is that it is this comedy that has some really serious notes through that repetition and trying to figure out how to save a life, how to save yourself, how to save community in those moments. It makes you look at some of the things that as a human, you wish that you would have had the chance to do over again. Right? We all have lived an experience where we go, God, if I had just said this thing, if I had just done that differently, oh, if I could go back on that vacation, it'd be great. Right. And now you get to watch a person experience that and see what honestly they would do over again. But the point of this one is that sometimes he does it over again and it's still, you're going to get that same result of you have the day over again. You don't get to move forward. And I think there's that tragedy of repetition of, you can do it again and again and again, and hopefully have a time where you're going to get to move forward. But with this Groundhog Day, it's like, when? It's totally unknown. It's when are we done? Which I know is a bullet point we're talking about later, but so connected to right now. It's painful. Yeah.
I think the comedic moment that most people will remember from this film that gets repeated a lot is, of course, Ned Ryerson.
Yeah, I was just gonna say Ned
played gloriously by Stephen Tobolowsky,
so
Phil encounters him every day on his way to the Groundhog broadcast, and that first encounter, of course, Phil, it's he's supposed to be a childhood friend of Phil's, or at least a childhood acquaintance.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say friend. If it was a friend, Phil clearly would have actually remembered him. But that first encounter, of course, he has absolutely no idea who it is. And then every other time, he has to figure out some way to acknowledge it and get him out of his way faster. And it's just, it gets to the point where, he punches him. How would I put this? He makes a very uncomfortable sexual advancement on him.
Yeah.
In one, it's like whatever he can do to get this guy out of his way. But every day he's one of the few comedic constants that shows up. And he's so good at it.
Yeah. That and the radio in the beginning. I think that's like also, it starts the day. So it quite literally starts the day. And just that whole, I got you, babe. That whole moment right there at that start, you just go, first of all the songs that I'd have to listen to on repeat every day, is this the one that I want? But then also, what does that song say about the day? What does it say about time? But I think that's really great in the good morning, campers. I think just that whole sort of repetition as well. And then his relationship with the hotel hostess, and they talk about breakfast. There's so many.
Oh yeah, the bed and breakfast. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many. But yeah, Ned Ryerson. Phil Connors, I thought that was you.
And there are also moments that we get to see that you don't get to necessarily see the repetition of it beforehand, but you get to sort of understand that he's been living this life over and over, this day over and over again. Like the scene where he's sitting down at the bed and breakfast in the evening watching Jeopardy with everybody, and he knows all the answers.
Yeah.
And everyone thinks that, he's either a genius or, he has some sort of, maybe he has some sort of psychic ability, but it's like, nope, he just literally has memorized this episode. Can you imagine having to sit through the same television program every single day? That would be...
No, I would hate it.
absolutely unbearable. I wish Frank was here because this kind of circles back to a conversation we had about the Thing, because they're up in the ice station, and all the only television they're able to watch are the television programs they've recorded on VHS. So they have these game shows that they keep watching. And at
Oh,
one point, a character says, "I know how this one ends," and ejects it. It's like that. It's the exact same thing.
yeah.
Being stuck in, you just without a time loop. You're just stuck doing the same things over and over again.
Oh,
Um,
that would suck, especially to be stuck on a game show. I'm sorry, but that would be the worst because it's not even like you can really watch it for aesthetic design choices or character interpretation and go, "Oh, I picked up something new here. I picked up." No, it's like, here's, oh, look, the Daily Double. That's it.
yeah.
Oh, that would suck.
Um, and you mentioned we talked a little bit about melancholy. The One of the hardest parts of the film, and it's so good. There's another character that Phil encounters every day on his way to see the groundhog, and it's an old man, presumably a homeless man, and for several instances, Phil just brushes him off. And at one point, Phil finally just reaches into his wallet and just gives him just he's got to be close to everything he's got.
Mhm.
I'm thinking, oh, I may as well try and do some good. And that's when he starts to encounter the old man later in the evening. And every time, no matter what Phil does, the old man dies. He takes him to the hospital. He tries to save him himself. But the person at the hospital, nurse, doctor, I'm not sure who, but she says, you know, there really isn't anything we could do. It's just his time, and that is tough. In a time loop to experience that over and over again, to get that lesson that sometimes there isn't anything that we can do. Like you've already said,
Yeah.
sometimes there are things we can't change, no matter how we try, no matter how much better of a person we've become. There are things that we have absolutely zero control over. Um,
Yeah.
which is wonderful. Just so it's a wonderful moment
It is
in the
every
story.
time, and it is, it just does what all art should do and makes you think about your interactions with people. But really, every moment that he has with that old man, it's just beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, such a good movie.
And not long before that is a scene that it starts out darkly comedic and then really just becomes dark. And that is when Phil kidnaps the groundhog and
Yeah.
drives off the cliff in the quarry. And it starts out a little bit funny because it has that little cute bit of dialogue with Larry who says, you know, maybe he's all right. And then the truck just blows up. He says, "Oh no!" But then he just keeps filming.
Mhm.
And it's like, okay, that's a little darkly humorous. And then it's like it's a little bit funny of just the length he goes to go downstairs to get the toaster and
Yeah.
kill himself that way. But then it just immediately switches to like the
Yeah.
truck and diving off of the top of a building. It's like it's not funny anymore.
No. Yeah. I
It's
forgot
just
about that poster moment. Yeah.
it's just he's so desperate to get out.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and
Which, I mean, yeah, those moments are so hard. And I think that, you know, also as an educator right now, I mean, not connecting directly to the suicide commentary, but I've seen so many more of my students struggling with the pandemic now. And I equate it not only because we've been in it for almost a year, but when we did honestly start having to do the lockdown parts of it, the quarantines, we were closer towards the end of March. Like, yes, we found out more about it at the the middle of March, but really the end of March is when people were like, oh, okay, we should actually really stay home. We should this, and that's a moment when you're getting to almost April. So yeah, you're still in towards the winter, but you have a little bit of spring. There's a little bit more hope. And now we've just gone through and are still in winter with this, and we're almost hitting a year. And, you look at what does Phil think? He's like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to, and I'm getting more of students just going, I can't look at a screen. I can't, students and professors, students and teachers, it's exhausting doing the same thing. And that's what we're doing. I mean, getting to be able to get out changes that so much. But like, we get up, we brush our teeth, we turn on our computer, we sit at our computer in the same room of our house. We don't have passing periods. We can't go check in at somebody at their office and just do a quick hello. You can't go to a coffee shop. Well, I mean, you shouldn't. If there are places that are opening up, but that's another social commentary for another conversation, right? And that there's just the mundane of it. And sometimes it's hard to find that joy, hard to find that drive to move yourself forward, and so many people, yeah, it's just, yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, and when you are in, and of course, repetition is also it's good for us. Having a routine can be good.
Yeah.
It's what allows us to, or it's what drives us to eat breakfast in the morning, which we should, and to know when we should have lunch and dinner, so that we all sort of schedule our lives around certain events.
Right.
But it is the small differences in every single day that really make it all great. And
Yeah.
when those differences are gone, um, you know, we are we'll be lucky to have stuff like you know having the holiday breaks, and
Hmm.
you were able to come visit us for the
Yeah.
holiday break, so that was a good change for all of us.
Yeah.
um, as the weather starts warming up, it'll be nicer to get outside and walk instead of feeling like we need to be stuck inside. Because again, up here in Washington, this hasn't been like a particularly frigid winter, but
Mhm.
it's not been pleasant. It's been rainy.
Yeah.
You've had snow on your side of the state.
Yep.
It's not been a pleasant winter at all.
Yeah.
So to be able to get out there, to get in t-shirts and shorts, and I know we're just getting into February, so
Yeah.
we're still quite a ways away. But that that whole that whole concept of change, thank goodness, that we're not going to be reliving winter.
Oh my
Um,
gosh. Oh, yeah. I'm so thankful for the season changes. I mean, even just, and then you just look back and you connect that to Groundhog Day. I mean, Groundhog Day is February 2nd, right? So, and he's in Pennsylvania.
yeah,
So it's cold. Think about all of the storms that have been hitting the East Coast. It's cold, it's snowy, it's gray. People are putting on a cheery face because it's this made up holiday. Meanwhile, having to like be surrounded by all of this cheer and happiness and excitement and thrill of a new day upon you, and you living in this continual state of, I mean, I think Groundhog Day also did something really important for the state of mental health before its time, before it was really conversation that we were willing to have. And that's why I think like a lot of people could look back on it and look at it and be like, oh my gosh, this comedy and this, and but there's also really, really important messages to take from that now, and to just be like, hey, here are signs to look at for people who are feeling that they're living in this constant state of repetition, who are feeling down, who are feeling helpless. So thanks, Groundhog Day, for doing something before we were ready to talk about it. But I also think connecting that to the larger essence of art, that is something that art does, is it goes, hey, here are these things, and it might be a totally different lens that I need to introduce it to you through, but this is important and we should talk about it. And then we live with it for a while and then we go, oh my gosh, we really should. So God, art is so cool.
yeah, just that whole concept um, in film was really, at least the way Groundhog Day presented, was very ahead of its time.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I do want to. I do think I'm taking it back to sort of the comedy of it. I do think it's
Yes.
hilarious that the reason that he's stuck in Punxsutawney is because of a blizzard that he had forecast would not happen.
Yes. Oh, that's such
Um,
a good point. Yeah. I
you
know
know,
we
he's
just went
he's
on this little darker tangent, but I mean, there's beautiful comedy and light in it, and that's a really good point. Yeah, it's not going to happen. This blizzard's not going to whatever, and it's the
yeah.
thing that traps him, the thing that he is not willing to, that he can't see. Yeah, that's a really good point. But there's so many beautiful points in it. I mean, I think let's connect to the hope that we have all had in this pandemic too. I mean, there are a lot of people who were like, "Oh my gosh, this is my chance to write my book, to do this, to do that." And yeah, there are moments like that, and it depends on your personality. That's not going to be the thing for everyone, right? Honestly, it's a day-to-day survival, which is what Phil eventually learns, right? Is it's how do I survive this day? What do I get out of this day? Maybe this is the day where I put on my pants. Great, awesome, that's fantastic. But what I can see it with Phil doing is Phil has to go through the entire stage of the grieving process of I'm not going to move past this, of I've lost the opportunity to meet new people, and then is willing to create ice sculptures and learn to dance and play the piano and all of these really cool things, right? But in the movie, that's really awesome that we can do. And I think that in society, there's been a lot of pressure from some people who are like, oh my gosh, I haven't written my novel. I haven't learned a new skill. And it's like, we still also have to go through the grieving process that is COVID, right? And so I think that's really, really cool though, that Groundhog Day does introduce that and talks about here are the stages of it. And now I'm into the moment where I can move forward and learn something new and make myself a better human in one way or another.
That actually is we've been transitioning perfectly into the whole concept of using the time loop as a character arc for Phil because he spends a lot of time first trying to figure out how do I get out of this and but he's even at the points where he's stressed he's still able to there are times where he does find some small things to learn.
Yeah.
I love the scene where um, he's able to convince Rita that something is wrong and they go back to his place and he's just teaching her how to flip playing cards into a hat and she asks him like how'd you learn to do this? It's like just 4 or 5 hours a day and it's like you could do that. You could take those 4 or 5 hours every day if you just have that same day.
Right. But he has to learn
And
to get to that point. Yeah. Ugh.
and eventually, flipping cards into a hat becomes something bigger, like you said, like playing the piano and learning to dance. Something that is going to bring much more people joy and himself joy, because it's clear by the end of the movie when he's up there on the stage playing the piano that he's having a good time.
Yeah. And not just
Um,
for him, like you said, it is about bringing other people joy. Like he found joy in it. Like, hey, here's a skill. Like I've got the time, let me do it. But now, because at the end of the movie, there's that huge party. It's oh, let me share what I have discovered about myself with others to see what kind of joy it brings. And there isn't it. Is it the mayor? No, it's somebody. One of the townspeople. It's the husband and wife in the town, and he'd had back pain or hip pain, and through the repetition, Phil had learned that, so he went and talked to him. So then the couple was dancing at the party, and there's all of those little things that start to
yeah.
come together through you talk about that time loop of I meet these people, and now I know, hey, I can go talk to you about this. I can talk to you. It's yeah, ugh. It's a sense of community. I mean, I think that's what I really love about that at the end. It's just something that we are not great at now because we're always on our devices or we don't really say hi to people. I mean, I feel it too. I live in an apartment complex and somebody was walking up the other day. I think it was a male person, and they're like, "Do you know where is there a Hannah who lives here?" And I was like, I have no idea because I don't know my neighbors, right? And it's just you look at that movie and you go, "Oh, look at this community and what they've done and how they've helped each other and how awesome."
But of course, it takes him most of the movie to get there because,
Yep.
it starts out, initially it's just disbelief, that
Yeah.
sense of, okay, this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
How do I get through it? And once you get to the third day, um, that's where we get to the point in his character arc where it's like, okay, if I'm not getting out of this, why don't I take the best advantage of it that I can in a selfish way? And that's when he goes on the joyride.
Yep.
And that sort of transitions into, okay, I can get to learn people, but for selfish reasons, which is how he seduces Nancy. And
Mm-hmm.
then that builds to, he tries to seduce Rita and fails so many times.
So
And
many times.
that's so many times. And it is, you look at it now, it's like, oh my gosh, he's kind of despicable and disgusting for doing that. It's
Yeah.
not him at his best. And when he realizes he can't get what he wants, I think that's the point where he starts to go into the suicide loop.
Yeah.
Um, but I do, it's a hard point in the movie, but I love the way they transition right out of it when he finally gives up on that, and just it transitions to, I'm a god. Like, what a nice little transition to get out of it. It's like, oh, look at that. It's like, and that's when I he hasn't quite figured out um to how to be a better person yet, but he's figured out, I think, how to cope with existing in the world at that point.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important sentence that you just said. Like, you know, he's learned to cope in that world. I think that's a really, yeah, that's a really great way to put that. Yeah, it's a really great
So,
way. Yeah. Oh, time loops.
but I do think it's his interactions with the old man that where we really finally see that change of, I
Yeah.
can be better for other people and not just for myself.
Yeah.
Um, and I love the little I love when he goes to run all the little errands towards the end of the film. He fixes the tire. Um, I love
Oh
when he
yeah,
saves
the little ladies.
and
Yeah.
he saves the kid who falls out of the tree.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of my favorite parts. Yeah, you never thank me.
Yeah.
It's like he's saved this kid. Goodness knows how many times. He's never been thanked.
Never been thanked.
Um, so it's actually I was thinking about it, and it's actually the story kind of mirrors another story that revolves around a holiday, and that's A Christmas Carol.
It's so interesting in your itinerary when you put about time loops. I thought about Christmas Carol and I was like, ah, oh,
Because
interesting.
Christmas Carol is, of course, not really a time loop, but is definitely a
Right.
sort of like, was it a dream or was time simply frozen for
Right.
Scrooge? Or, but they do kind of end the same way of, waking up and it's the next morning.
Yeah.
It finally happened.
What day is it today?
What
What
day is it?
day is
Yeah.
Christmas Day? Yeah.
Oh,
Doesn't he even go to the window in the end of this movie?
yeah. He goes to the window and he looks out, and the ground is covered in snow,
Yeah.
and there's no one out walking.
Yeah. Ah, so good. So good.
So, yeah, it's such an interesting, because and of course, you know, we study stories frequently because of what we do with theater,
Mm-hmm.
and because we both love movies and stories in general. And of course, an arc is not always linear. In fact, it's hardly ever linear. That's why it's an arc.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting that stories themselves are generally linear. You generally follow a straight shot through a story. Um, and in this one, it's not a straight shot. You're literally going in circles, and you use a circle to create that arc
Yeah.
instead of that straight line. It's just such an interesting way to go about it. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about other time loop movies towards
Yeah.
the end, but like this is really no other character arc in other time loop movies that I have seen um, is so attached to the concept of nonlinear time. Um,
Yeah. I can't. I mean,
and
yeah.
that is and I think that is because I'm going to move on to the next section here.
Yeah.
Um, like when you think about it, this is a science fiction film. Like, obviously, it's got to be some kind of science fiction or fantasy because this can't happen,
Right.
But that sci-fi element is missing. There's no device that's creating this time loop. There is no omnipotent force upon high that is telling Phil that he needs to, become a better person to break the time loop, like there is in Christmas Carol.
Right.
It just happens for no discernible reason. And I think it makes the reason it's so that I think that's why it becomes a great comedy is because if there was a device or a force
Mm-hmm.
that was that we could directly see causing this, I think suddenly it becomes drama.
Yeah, I could see that.
It becomes a force that you need to change because I said so, not just
Right.
because I need to change. Instead, it doesn't become you need to change, it becomes I need to change because if I don't change, then I'm just going to be miserable for
Right.
this entire loop that could go on for eternity.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think that's a really important part is, you have no idea how long it's going to last. Like it could go on for eternity because there is no other force that you can question. There's no one that you can just say, hey, like, what do I have to do to achieve this? No one's telling you. So really it is. And that's why I think you get to see all of those processes of I'm going to be selfish about it. Okay, I just want it to end. Okay, well, if I am going to be here, how can I make the best of my time here? And what so yeah, I think that that's a really important part is that we don't know why he was stuck in this loop. Like why was it him? Could it happen again? Has it happened to others? Wonderful questions. But what is
I
it?
also
What does it force us to do as humans if time is stopped? I think that's an important question to ask in the right now. Like, what have we done?
well, like, and it gets me wondering why, you know, the story is always more interesting when it's only one person experiencing it, because if it's the entire world experiencing a time loop again, then it becomes science fiction. Like
Right.
it doesn't become how do we change, it becomes how do we change the loop.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and the fact that this happened to a just a weatherman, if this had happened to a scientist, which is how
Oh,
this story probably, would be told under normal science fiction circumstances, is I am a scientist living in a time loop. How do I fix the loop?
how do I? Yeah. But now it's how do I look at
How do I
myself?
engage with? Yeah.
Right. And I think I'm trying to. You just asked a really beautiful question. Literally, like not even 30 seconds ago, and I can't remember exactly how you phrased it. But I think that's a really important question that we honestly are having to ask ourselves is like, what do we do in this loop? Right. And we currently are living in a semi loop, not as dramatic as Groundhog Day. But I think, at the beginning it was, oh my gosh, and everybody bought toilet paper and everybody freaked out. And we did a lot of things selfishly uh, selfishly and for our health, and then it took us that moment to look at the world and gave us time to actually listen and not be so caught up in ourselves and our commute and our drive and our everything that we listened to what was happening in the world with in regards to George Floyd and other shootings and other murders of Black men and women, and now we're in a time where we're going, okay, how do I contribute to the world? How do I live in this world? What do I need to do to be better? I think that we've gone through many of those stages of grief, of discovery, and a lot of us are now needing to get to that point as we're beginning to open up into the action, that on lesser stakes Phil takes to better his community is honestly our next phase as we continue through this COVID pandemic.
Hold the phone. Hold the phone. We have a Gary Chambers entering the room.
What?
I'm only an hour late.
You're good.
Switch views. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, Gary Chambers.
Hey,
Woo!
Oh, Gary. So we've actually gotten through a pretty big bulk of the itinerary at this point, but we can loop back because you know what? That's what you do on Groundhog Day. You loop back and you do things again. So I'll catch
your little hand in mine.
Yes.
Your little hand in mine.
Yep. So I'll catch you up here. I will not repeat the news. It's not really just news that's too fun to discuss. It's just news. So We first talked about the significance, of course, the Groundhog Day holiday, and discussed how it's a holiday that is centered around the whole concept of change. In this case, the change in weather, and of course, now Phil is stuck in that life that can't change. We talked about the comedy and melancholy of repetition, the funny moments with Ned Ryerson and how do you react to that differently every day. Phil's encounter with the old man and how that sort of teaches him the lesson that there are things in life that you can't change no matter how hard you try or how many different ways you approach it. We talked about Phil's character arc being generated by a loop instead of by a linear progression of story, because obviously this film is just one big wonderful loop. And we just sort of finished about talking about the whole concept of this is a sci-fi film without the science element behind it. There's no force or God above that's generating this loop that we're aware of, and that it makes for a better comedy that way and a better story. That sometimes you don't have to know what it is that is going on that's causing these strange phenomenon. Um, Gary, what can since you're just joining us now, what are some of your thoughts about just this film as a monumental comedy?
Catherine, do you feel better being off the hook?
Oh my gosh. It's been easier than I thought it was going to be. I was nervous when Ben was like, Carrie's not in the room yet. I kept telling him, I could do this as late as 4:30. We could push it back. There could be more people in the space. But honestly, it's not been awful talking to my brother.
Yeah, I would imagine that growing up with him was an excellent primer for being able to do this episode. But the real question is, has the most emblematic portion of the film been discussed? How much money was in the bags that Phil carried off from the money truck?
No, we haven't discussed it.
We haven't even talked about that.
No. Come on. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What did he walk away with? Was that $1,000? $20,000? More? What did he do with the money? I mean, these are the philosophical discussions that really must be happening when we're talking about a movie about a time loop. That and I Got You, Babe. I mean, these are the most salient portions of the film. No, of course I'm kidding. What was the question again? What do I think of it?
Well, yeah.
Hour here.
Since you're just joining us, please unload your thoughts.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's real easy to lose sight of the fact that this is a comedy, and I have heard nerds like myself wax philosophically about this picture for many years now. I mean, the picture's almost 30 years old, for crying out loud. And by waxing philosophically, I simply mean that what does the time loop mean? What is its deeper meaning? What is the deep-seated ideological fundamentals that are underpinning this film that make it stand out and make it last so long? And I think it's kind of interesting that it's a timeless film when it's a film about time. But I must allude back to the days of Voyager, when Captain Janeway in one episode said something about the time paradoxes being complete rubbish and she hates these damn things. And this is one of those where it's not really a mockery of time travel or a mockery of being in a time loop, but it doesn't take itself so seriously that we look at time travel as something like this ethereal, metaphysical type of philosophical discussion that we need to delve deep into. It's really using time as a trope to create comedy. And the comedy, while there's a lot of underpinnings to it that actually can be dealt with, it really is just designed to be a trope to evoke a few laughs. And by wrapping popular culture into it, vis-a-vis the Jeopardy game, vis-a-vis all of the attempts at suicide, which maybe 30 years later maybe wouldn't play quite so well if the movie was released today, which is just what happens with film, is that it's marked in a time period. It's got its stamp. and what was acceptable in the mid 1990s wouldn't necessarily be as acceptable today. But it's still funny as hell. Every time that alarm clock goes off and you see the look on Bill Murray's face, it's absolutely priceless. You know what's about to happen is that he's going to experience this loop again, but what's going to change? So, in the deeper philosophical side of things, from me, my takeaway from the film is live your best life, live your best life every day. Don't be, can I say this on TV? Don't be a dick. You can bleep it out if you want. I'll only use it once, Ben. But really, what Phil is as he goes through his journey is what we are doing as human beings going through this life, and that's trying to find our best path forward. Only in this, there's this sort of ethereal sense of we are looking at the benchmarks of his life, what he did to create himself as a narcissist, uh, a pathetic example of a human being who's only got it in for himself, to finding that altruism within his heart, which allows him to move forward. And that is really a parable for our own lives as we move forward, is do what we can to benefit our fellow human beings and get beyond that. Everything else, hence the comedy, is laughable. Phil Connors, pow. Okay, you know, who has not walked down the street and run into somebody that you just wanted to deck? Well, we get to see that on screen. And that's part of the comedic aspects of it, is that we're living vicariously through Phil as he goes through versions of this timeline that exercises everything that we wish we could do. I mean, my own personal philosophy is we are all Daffy Duck, but we aspire to be Bugs Bunny, right? Phil, in these loops, is Bugs Bunny. He's living life on his own terms, yet somehow, some way, there's always somebody that's out to get him. But he goes through it so many times, he understands the workaround. And so he games the system. He knows exactly when to pick up those money bags off the truck. He knows exactly what's his bucket says, and knows that it's time to just lay him out flat on the sidewalk. But he comes to his own by realizing that type of selfish mentality isn't going to get him his heart's desire. And his heart's desire only becomes known to him when he rights his moral ship. Now, that encapsulates in 5 minutes or so my feelings on the film, but let that inspire more questions and more dialogue. We can delve as philosophically or as comedically as we want. There's so much to mine here.
Well, we've also actually, you talk about Groundhog Day being a timeless film. We've talked about how we are all sort of stuck in a dreadful loop right now, as a country and as just a global population, with the fact that we kind of have had to adjust to pandemic life. And, you know, that means several streaks of days that are going to be very similar because we're not going anywhere. We're not interacting with people outside of our own homes. We are currently breaking that loop right now, just talking to each other, um, talking to people that we don't see every day, that we don't talk to every day. This show, right? I'm really proud to say this show right now is breaking the loop that we live, which is great because you know I don't think there's anything that I want more right now than to be able to just drive over to Ellensburg and see Catherine, or to drive down to Tacoma, see Gary, see Trish, see so many people down there all in the same place. And unfortunately, unlike Phil, we are sort of stuck with, well, this is not about writing our moral compass. This is actually about the science fiction element. We break this time loop by creating a cure. And the problem is we need to get everyone on board with that cure and make sure we can all get to that cure. I don't know what would be worse if it was, I mean, in a sense, as a global population, particularly as a national population, we need to start writing a lot of moral compasses to break a lot of loops, not just the pandemic loop, but the loop of the loop of racism is a huge one. Actually, brought that up a little bit because it's we as a nation, particularly again in this nation, we have such a short attention span that we will talk about racism for a few weeks after a black man is shot. And then the next worst thing happens that could be pandemic related. It could be a tragedy. It could be a plane crash. And then we talk about that. And then we talk about the next tragic thing. We are so stuck on not fixing too many problems because we have so many problems that keep popping up. But some of them are just so trivial. Again, there are problems we can't fix. We need to focus on the ones that we can.
Well, if you look at the film and its parallel to the pandemic, which is essentially what we're doing here, we recognize that Phil was in a time loop and we're in a time loop of our own. But what we're trying to do is fix systemic problems that are based on a news cycle, not necessarily those that are omnipresent, persistent problems. School shootings, mass shootings, let's call it what it is. Or any of the other endemic problems that are not just based in the United States, but this is where we're based. So we'll focus on that for a moment. And what kind of time loops are we creating time and time again, Ben, as you allude? If we go through a mass shooting, the news cycle focuses and obsesses on it, then it becomes this cultural cornerstone that we have to talk about for a brief period of time. And we do have the time attention spans of gnats. We really do. Yeah. Because once the next news cycle comes around and the goalpost gets moved somewhere else, then we're talking about Democrats or Republicans behaving badly in Congress. We are talking about the next, whatever the disaster du jour is. The cycle seems to be, it hits mainstream news media, then commentary is being opined on some of the more fringe media. Then it goes into the comic brains like my own, where we make memes about it, and it becomes a cultural reference with a comedic undertone. And then shortly thereafter, it becomes forgotten when the next tragedy comes around. So it's not as though we're entering this pandemic and mass shootings have stopped. Well, maybe they have, but because of a diversionary tactic like a pandemic, that's what it took for that to happen. So what if culturally we can divest ourselves from the news cycle and talk about the human cycle, a more long-term beneficial impact to our culture by not being so short-term memory based. We have to remember that if we don't affect change, like what has happened or what had happened in Parkland, then we become a memory patient. We have to be consistently reminded that it did happen. Or it can pass into mythology and it doesn't exist. Or conspiracy theories like some politicians are putting out there these days, to be unnamed at this moment, but you know who I'm talking about, that actually purports that, oh, it didn't happen at all. Well, that's preying upon the mindset of the American culture that we choose not to remember, or we bury it underneath a rug and we don't recall something that was important because we didn't make the change when it was a relevant topic of discussion. And it's not as though that discussion became irrelevant. It's just that we stopped talking about it because, oh, something shiny, something new comes along. So how often do we need to come across a 9/11 or a Parkland shooting or a Columbine until we actually affect change so that it's no longer part of the omnipresent dialogue? We've done something about it. Now we gauge its progress as we've affected change. And if this film comes anywhere into this conversation, it's that it is indicative of the type of cycles that we go through all the time in America. We keep repeating the same mistakes. I self-edited there. Because we draw conclusions, but then we don't affect change.
Right. Yes. I was just listening to a discussion panel on race and gender representation in theater for young audiences. And there was a panelist there who had talked about how a friend of his had just mentioned that they are not holding on to much hope that we are really going to move the needle, because white guilt only lasts so long before we just go back and reset and forget. And that just, oh my God, I know that I am a better person than I was in June of this year, but I still know that I have so much more to unlearn, to relearn, and to get to the point where we were connecting this to Groundhog Day, right? Of America, humans were living so much in their selfish acts, very similar to what Phil did. And when is it that you go and put your words and thoughts into action to impact your community? And that's where we can't necessarily 100% do right now, because the safest thing to do is not be with the physical community, but there are still things we can do to make that change, to impact that change, to be better. But we have so much to do. And I hope that we as three white identifying humans, like, honestly do not let that guilt go, and we make change. We be better.
That as tragedy attrition.
Mm-hmm.
We go through a tragic moment that impacts our culture in a visceral, palpable, powerful way, and then we forget.
Yeah.
And we attrition off and go about our lives doing what we normally do. We become self-serving, as we have to do. We circle back around into our own little tiny circles, and we focus on being who we are and being the best possible person that we can be. But we forget about that dialogue that was so important just 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
Before something positive impacts our culture, a change.
Yep.
One could point fingers all you want. You could say, well, that's leadership's responsibility. We voted these representatives into Congress and the Senate. Excuse me, that's redundant. The Congress, and then we don't follow up and demand accountability from our Congress people and our other leaders. We simply let it go. Oh, well, we've made our voices heard, and now it's up to them to run with the ball and take it all the way to the end zone. Well, it doesn't happen that way unless we continually apply pressure to our leadership. They won't recognize that it's still on the forefront of our brains. So our actions inform leadership making changes, but if we don't, as the constituency, follow through and hold those members of Congress and other agencies accountable, then it will just attrition off into the daily thing, or the next tragedy comes around, and then that becomes the hot button topic.
I'm so glad Gary came in when he did. We were like, we had just started on this conversation, and then everything that you said was just like, oh, yes, we were clearly meant to keep going. Oh, beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, brilliant.
Brilliant, I tell you. It's absolutely. But that doesn't, and here's where things get really interesting, is that we can talk about the cultural, societal aspects of going through time loops of our own.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing really funny about that. What makes this script so endearing to all of us is that it shines a spotlight. I mean, we're talking about loads of lumens focused on something that we go through all the time. And time, interestingly, has not had a negative impact on what relevancy that should be attached to this. We keep repeating the same cycle over and over again, not getting satisfaction because we're not holding anybody accountable for our bad behavior, our collective bad behavior.
Mm-hmm.
But this script is brilliant because it points a comic light on it. And what that is an inroad into the human psyche. That is to say that if all we're doing is hitting people over the head with tragedy all the time, which is what the news cycle is for, we become desensitized to the news. But if we create a comic aspect of it, if we begin to laugh at ourselves and not take ourselves too terribly serious over something that does have a lot of import, then that is an inroad to thought. That is an inroad to thought processes that can affect change. So the comedy informs thought, the thought becomes action. At least that's the way it should be. That we're talking about it some 30 odd years later, isn't that a benchmark for success of this film?
Yeah. Yeah. Before you came in, we were talking about how time loops weren't necessarily a new thing for when Groundhog Day was filmed, but the way that it was implemented as a comedy put Groundhog Day well ahead of its time amongst the comedies of its era. Um,
That, and
because
there are a
again,
handful of questions that will come up on Jeopardy that we will never not know the questions to.
Yes,
I know the answer. I know the answer to that because I've watched this film many times.
so many. Oh, so good.
well, I'm going to move on to sort of the final segment of our discussion here. Uh, so, what are some of those other notable time loop movies that we've had either before or since? And is Groundhog Day, is it a genre all its own? I asked that question because since Groundhog Day, pretty much every time a time loop movie comes out, um, you know, when people are asked to, tell me what this is about, and they'll say, "Oh, it's Groundhog Day with aliens. It's Groundhog Day with, such and such." So like it really is a testament to just how important Groundhog Day is and how timeless it is that we do use it as a benchmark or as an example to say it's just Groundhog's Day again.
Yeah.
Even though there are great time loop movies that have come since that do feel unique. Catherine, did you come up with any time loop movies or even just stories in general?
Yeah, okay. So I don't know if it's so much a time, I don't know if it's a time loop one. But one of the movies that I really enjoyed Frequency, but I don't think it's time loop. I think it's just two timelines that happen to connect to each other. But I don't think it's time loop. But I thought about time and Frequency came to my noggin. But I think
I still haven't seen that one, even though I know you obsessively watched it when we were in high school.
I did. Yeah. It's a really good one. It's a really good father-son movie. It's a really good one.
It's Dennis Quaid and Jim Caviezel, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
But I
like
don't
Jim
think it's
Caviezel,
time
so I
loop.
should probably watch it.
Yeah. I don't think it's time loop. It's like there are two different timelines and then they connect through a sci-fi source and then they impact each other, but I don't think it's not loop. There's a movie that I watched on Netflix once called About Time. I really only watched it once, but it was like the men in this family had the power to be able to go back in time and fix moments of their life to help them. And it was only the men within like the certain family line who had this power, which was an interesting one, but I don't know enough about it to like speak intelligently about it.
That's the one with, oh gosh, what's his name from Harry Potter and Star Wars,
Yeah, that
new
guy,
Star Wars.
the dude with the
Domhnall
name.
Gleeson.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one either, but that's also because it's a romantic comedy and I'm
All right. So the two
up
that
my
I bring
alley.
to the table, clearly Ben needs to add to his watch list. Didn't you just post something about movies that you think you hadn't watched? Frequency. Put it on the list.
It's on the list.
Okay, good. All right. Gary's turn because I struck out.
Well, Looper is the most obvious, and it's been a few years since I've seen it, but it is very genre specific. That's exactly what it's designed to do, is to address time loops and how it affects society and how we feel about that. I would also say that while it's not genre specific, a lot of science fiction elements are about time are layered into a lot of scripts that seem to resonate over the years, including TOS, pretty much everything in the Star Trek canon, regardless of what series that you're referring to. The most notable time travel movie, of course, would be Star Trek 4. And really, whether it's a loop or a time travel film, what we're talking about is righting a wrong that occurred in the past to affect the future. And that's the more philosophical view of time travel as it pertains to mass culturally accepted media. So if we go into a theater and we watch Star Trek 4, we're confronted with a humorous script that has science fiction pervasive throughout the thing. It's in the Star Trek canon. But what's the real story? Well, the real story is a group of people go back in time because a few years after the time in which Kirk and Spock arrive, humpback whales are now gone. They are extinct, which means they are unable to communicate with an alien species that had arrived at Earth pre-humans and only spoke or communicated with the humpback whales of that time. So we effectively killed ourselves by not being kind to our planet. And really, what we're talking about with time loop movies or time travel movies is righting a wrong that should never have been wrong in the first place. So that's about living your best life. I mean, you could extrapolate that to the nth degree. I mean, this is a moral philosophical argument or a professorial discussion that can happen in academia all night long. Is what do we have to do in order to not feel as a community like we have to go back and fix things, which of course is not at this point possible. But what do we have to do today so that we don't in 20 years have to go back or feel like we have to go back in time and fix a problem that we created? The most salient example I can think of that today is the climate crisis. We've been in a position for many years now where if we make the change right now, we will avoid disaster. Now, within our lifetimes in 20 or 30 years, we hope that we're around to look back on this period of time to 2021. Are we going to go, God, I wish I could go back to 2021 and fix what we screwed up? Or are we going to go, boy, am I glad we took that course of action because we avoided disaster?
Let's do that one. Let's do that one.
But really, isn't this film about avoiding regret, but doing it in this context in a humorous way and a benign way? Nothing really bad ever happens to Phil. There isn't some sort of cataclysmic event that prevents him from making a positive impact on himself and the people that are around him. Whereas the decisions that you and I make today in the real world do impact our future. And we can't look at that comedically. We cannot take ourselves too terribly seriously and be able to laugh at ourselves, but that doesn't absolve us from making the changes that we have to make in order to not live with regret 30 years from now.
Oh, Gary, how do I even follow that up with my three comparably mundane choices that are not quite as that they're probably philosophical, but yeah, Star Trek 4 was a very, very good choice and a very good talking point. I'm actually going to bring up a movie that I brought up last week and describe it in a little bit more detail this time around. That's Source Code. Is a time loop movie, and Gary had asked if it's one worth revisiting today, and I still think it is. So to give it a little more context, Jake Gyllenhaal is sort of forced to relive a time loop in which a terrorist has set off a bomb on a train, and he needs to do this because this same terrorist has threatened to blow up another location, an undisclosed location. And by going back through that time loop, which unfortunately always ends with the bomb going off, he has to keep gleaning as much information as he can going back through these time loops in order to find out where that next bomb is going to go off and catch the terrorist. And it sort of becomes a philosophical point where he finally decides, okay, you say that I'm just going into this machine and reliving, a set time, almost like playing through a level of a video game. What if I could change that within the confines of, your algorithm and change the outcome of this scenario? And the question is, can he do that? What will happen if he does? Will it create an alternate timeline? Who knows? You have to watch the movie to find out. But it's absolutely fascinating little film, in which it's just like, it is literally the same, like 5 minutes over and over and over again, in which he just has to figure out different ways to solve this problem. So again, much more science fiction than Groundhog Day, which I'll talk about in the next film too. It's much more science fiction. This one, Gary, you might have seen this one. It was a little bit more. It was a little bit bigger, and that was Edge of Tomorrow with Tom Cruise. Uh, so that one really is video game reality, um, in which Tom Cruise, I don't remember how his character gains this ability, but his catch is he's a soldier, there's an alien invasion, and he gains the ability to respawn at a certain point in time every time he dies. And so he has to keep living longer to figure out how to, find a means to defeat this alien invasion. Which, I mean, literally, that is what a video game is you go through it, you die, you learn from your mistake, you repeat, you die later, you just get better until you finally get to the end. And then the game is over. But of course, in
Unless
this
it's
case, the game
ET.
is an alien invasion. Huh?
Unless it's ET. Because if it's ET on the Atari 2600, you just repeat, 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 and you never win.
Oh,
Catherine's dying here because she knows the legend.
yeah, we weren't even alive, and
Oh,
that
stop it. Stop it. Stop it.
and that the legend of the ET, the game that almost killed an industry.
No, it did. As far as I'm concerned, it absolutely did. But that's another discussion for another podcast.
Yeah. Well, my final one is actually, and Catherine will appreciate this. Speaking of video games, my final time loop story is The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask.
Nice. I really thought you were going to use Doctor Strange in your time loop talk. I really did.
Well, that film has a time loop at the end.
All right, but no,
And
talk about Majora's Mask. Anything that has to do with Zelda and Link Adventures, I'm game. So
the whole point of Majora's Mask is that in 3 days you are transported into this strange town. You're in a foreign land, and you look up into the sky, and there is the moon, and the moon is coming down from the sky to destroy this town. And you realize you have 3 days to either flee the town or to stop the moon. Well, of course, because it's a video game, you can't just flee the town. That's just mean. So
at $55 a shot, it would be a ripoff too.
Yep. But because it's a Legend of Zelda game, you have a musical instrument that allows you to manipulate time. So what you do is you play through as much as you can, and you learn as much as you can about what you need to do, and then you go all the way back to the beginning of the loop, and you acquire the gear you need, and you get through as much of the story and interact with all the characters you need to get to interact with until you finally figure out, okay, this is how I stop the world from ending. And then you go in and you do it. But anyone who's played this game will tell you, you will have to reset that time loop several times. It's in game, it's considered 3 days. In real life, it is 72 minutes. And you can slow down time and make it 144 minutes, but that's still not enough time to do what you need to do in one time loop. It's so it's so fascinating to go through, and you get a little notebook that you can write. You write down, this is what people do every day, and so you get to know the schedules of everyone in the town or everyone in the house outside of town, and they literally do. It's just like Groundhog Day. They do the exact same things. And that's when you learn, okay, if I intercept the mailman at this time of day and I get this letter and I deliver it to someone personally, I might get a piece of heart, and so I have more life. And so you learn the little tricks and things of what people are doing, and it's just such a wonderful little gameplay loop. I think my favorite gameplay loop in that is cheating the bank. I wish we could do this in real life, where before you travel back in time, because when you travel back in time, you lose all of your consumables. You lose your arrows, your bombs, and you lose all of your money unless you deposit it in the bank. The bank will put a little stamp on your hand and say, this is how much money you have in your account right now. And then you go back in time, and then you go to the bank, and the bank's like, let me look at your hand. Oh, you have this much money with us. Cool. It's like, I never had that much money with you. I wish that would work in real life. That's total Phil Connors move right there.
There's scripts that were written for Doctor Who that obviously, the whole conceit behind Doctor Who is time travel, but some of which are really poignant. There's a villain, I believe they're called the Silence, and every time you see one of these characters, you're supposed to put a mark on your arm that indicates that you saw them, because as soon as you turn away from these characters, you forget that they existed. And what a novel concept. You've got a creature that's there to do you ill. You are impacted by their motivation negatively. You make a note on your own body that you've encountered them, but you have absolutely no recollection of why. Now, imagine that. Here we go, delving into that whole philosophical arena again. Isn't that really what we're doing in life? Are we really going through life and encountering maladaptive behaviors committed by somebody else? We make a note of it, and then we promptly forget, and then don't do anything about it. Or worse, don't know how to do anything about it. We become stymied by our own inability to recognize what the problem is, create an actionable solution, and then follow through. So a lot of these time travel movies become parables for our lives, to live our best life. I mean, even in The Legend of Zelda, it's the same thing. It's how much can you learn in this 72 minutes so that you can move forward and win the game. But it's whether it's winning the game or winning in life, it's the same.
Well, this has been an absolutely fascinating and one of the best conversations, I think, that has come out of talking about a film on this show. Before we move on to trivia and the end of the show, I just want to say, Gary, if you have not, this is appealing to the Doctor Who fan inside of you. If you have not watched the television show Community, you really should. And I say this because in season 3, they introduce a television program that is obviously supposed to be Doctor Who, but it's called Inspector Spacetime. And it becomes a huge part of Community lore for probably 2 or 3 seasons. And I think that of all the friends I have told to watch Community, you would appreciate that part of it the most.
Ironically, I've seen the first 2 seasons, and now I've got motivation to go into season 3.
There it is.
I know, Catherine. Yep. Isn't that pathetic? And interestingly, I've gone on YouTube and I've watched all of the interactions between the 2 characters that are stuck in the library, and they talk to each other. Glover and
Robin.
Yeah, and the 2 of them, just the 2 of them is worth that show is worth it.
Oh my God, yes, it so is. I love them. Last note on Community and Time, Ben, you said that, and then I went into Dean, right? Oh, we're a time hoodie.
We're a time hoodie.
I was like, that show.
All right, now I got something to look forward to. Thanks.
I was like, I have so much to watch after this conversation, right? Which is great.
Also, just for all the Marvel fans out there, those first 3 seasons of Community were run by the Russo brothers, and you can see, there's a very specific episode in season 3 that deals with alternate realities, and the more I watch Community, the more I think that the Russo brothers were just like, remember that episode about alternate realities and Community? How about we just turn that into a 2-part Avengers movie?
And you just bring up the most significant time travel anything in any media universe. Dormammu, I've come to bargain.
Right? Yes. Well, and that's where I thought Ben was going to go. I would have bet money on it. I would have so lost today, but I would have bet money that Ben was going to bring up Doctor Strange with time loops.
And he didn't.
No!
Well, I have failed. I've failed everyone.
Maybe because you're so tall, you wouldn't pick the low-hanging fruit.
Oh, there it is.
So
for the win.
I'll be here all
Anyway, we're moving on to trivia now. So this is going to be a Groundhog Day trivia,
Oh,
and
God.
I'm really interested to see if either of you get this because I didn't notice it watching it just Thursday night.
All right.
So of course there are several wonderful characters that Phil Connors encounters in the city of Punxsutawney, including a young couple that are supposed to be getting married, but the wife might be, the fiance might be having cold feet. Now, the man in this relationship, his name is Fred. Now, what actor played Fred in Groundhog Day? This is 1993, and that actor has since gone on to become a well-known actor. Is it A, Michael Shannon, B, Ed Helms, C, Christian Bale, or D, Breckin Meyer?
It's not Christian Bale.
Mm-mm.
So I've got a 1 in 3 chance.
I know. I'm sitting here.
What are the names again?
Michael Shannon, Ed Helms, Christian Bale, and Breckin Meyer.
Let's say Ed Helms.
I'm gonna go D.
Breckin Meyer?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we are currently at no one has gotten a point, and today it still holds up. I have stumped y'all for several consecutive episodes. It is, believe it or not, it's Michael Shannon.
No, it's not. Is it really? I have to.
It is. Yep. The man who would become General freaking Zod has a bit part in Groundhog Day. Yeah. And I came up with all the other names because I just Googled who the heck else was born in 1974, and those four are all the same. Can you also believe those four men are all the same age?
No. Wow.
Shape of Water. Wow.
Yeah. You're going, what?
I'll be damned.
So
I don't know how you do it, Ben. You come up with these esoteric questions that I almost always end up just guessing. I'm sure the audience is the same. It's like, these people have been working for years and multiple projects every year, and yet, it's Michael Shannon. I feel like
Wow. I knew it wasn't Ed Helms. I knew it wasn't Christian Bale. So I had a 50-50 and I still.
Welcome to our world, Catherine. This is what happens every week.
Ben, I don't like you right now.
Well, Catherine knows this is her second episode now.
Yeah, but still, this one's. I should have. I hate you. Okay. I'm over it.
Well,
just a little bit of self-loathing. Please forgive yourself.
It's okay. I'm over it now. Okay.
One of the best ways to write your moral compass is to forgive yourself.
Oh, way to bring that.
And then you won't be making the same mistakes next time on trivia.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. That has been episode 19. So thank you all for watching. Remember that you can find us at facebook.com/truthinfilm, on Twitter at Sunday_matinee, the blog at truthinfilm.wordpress.com. I think it's might be wordpress.com/truthinfilm. It's one of those two. I keep mixing that one up. Like and subscribe here on YouTube. Send in, if you have trivia questions, send in your 4-answer multiple choice question to fishislandsseesall@gmail.com. You'll get a shout out on the show. And maybe you'll actually give us a question that isn't going to completely stump the panel, because I apparently this year have been too good at stumping them. So yeah. Catherine and Gary, thank you very much for joining me today to talk about this wonderful, wonderful film. And everyone out there, have a good week. We'll be back next week with a look ahead at 2021.